because we're moving so fast, sometimes we don't think, maybe I'm talking to this person a certain way, or maybe this person who's come to me to have a conversation is trying to express something to me, but I'm so busy, I'm not really thinking, what are they actually saying to me?
This is Because People Matter, a podcast about celebrating leaders who are harnessing the best of each of their team members while driving success in their organizations and communities. Hosted by Dr. Helen Fagan, each episode features interviews with individuals who are leading the way. If you're ready to learn the impact leading with emotional intelligence and intercultural competence can have in your business, or wish to hear inspiring examples, this is the podcast for you.
Well, welcome friends to this episode. I am really excited today to be able to bring you Kenneth Sharperson. Kenneth is an attorney and the Chief Diversity Officer for Armstrong Teasdale, and he has been doing this for quite some time. And what I'm really excited is for you to learn about the reason he got into this, but also the work that they're doing in this and continuing to do, and how they are elevating the skills of attorneys in firms and how they are helping firms to be successful in their efforts. So I'm not going to hold it up anymore. I'm just going to let you dive in and listen to this great conversation. Welcome. Hi, Kenneth. Welcome to our conversation. I've been really excited to get together with you and chat since we chatted briefly about a week ago. Thank you for saying yes.
No, thank you. I really appreciate being here.
I'm excited to have our audience learn about you. And I always like to dive into the person. So if you wouldn't mind, would you share a little bit about who you are, your background, and what led you to pursue a career in the law?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently the Chief Diversity Officer at an AM Law 200 law firm, Armstrong Teasdale. Um, I've been here almost 2 years. I started in the practice of law in 2002. And prior to that, I was a public school teacher. And so that was one of the reasons why, I did want to get into the law. Is I saw some things in public education that probably needed to be reformed. And I felt like, if I went to law school, I could do something to improve public education.
All right. So, as far as your background, you grew up and you said you were interested in public school. Tell us a little bit about your growing up years, a little bit about where you grew up, what life was like for you.
Right. So I grew up in a suburb of Washington, D.C. My father was in the military and had gotten stationed at the Pentagon. And so when we moved to that area, we initially stayed on a military base. I think we've come from Japan, and we initially stayed on one of the bases, I think in their temporary housing. And then eventually my parents, my father and my mother purchased a home. And the home they purchased was in a community where we ended up being the second Black family to move in that community. The first Black family actually were their college classmates from South Carolina State University. So I imagine there might have been some phone calls and discussions. There's a house for sale on the block. Why don't you come move to this community? And it was very, lovely community. You could walk to the high school, you could walk to the elementary school. There was, woods around, and, you could play in the creeks and things like that. So it was a nice way to grow up in Virginia. But the interesting thing about that was, being the second, only second Black family to move in, there was a lot of things in that community where I was, me and my brother would be the first to join some sort of a club, or the first to join some sort of like soccer team or something locally, because there just were not a lot of, African Americans at the time. But, that experience, I think, has, really helped me grow to where I am now in my career, because I do feel like I can talk to anyone. I don't feel, sometimes, some people feel different when you might be one of only a few, African Americans or Asian or whatever, group you may be a member of in a room. And, I'm never uncomfortable when I'm in a room, sometimes being one of the only African Americans, especially being in the law, where, sometimes you're in the courtroom, or sometimes even in your own office, there's not a lot of African Americans. So I feel very comfortable being in those environments. And I think that, has helped my career having that experience of growing up as, being one of only two, Black families and essentially 4 or 5 Black students in the school, and having to interact with a lot of different people and having sort of to learn how other people think and get along with other people, and well, realizing actually that we're all humans and we're all the same.
Yeah, yeah, that's so interesting. I'm reading a book called It Goes Without Saying, and it's by Jack Condon, who's, kind of known as a godfather in the intercultural communication field. And he is writing in this book about his friendship with Edward T. Hall, who's known as the father of intercultural communication. And, they had a 40-year career working and stuff. And one of the things he says about Edward T. Hall's growing up years is that he was used to living in between cultures. So he lived part of the time in Missouri, part of the time in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Edward Hall did. And so the experience that he had, living in Santa Fe and the experience he had in Southern Missouri, very different, and how those shaped him. And what you're describing as being one of only two families, Black families and kids in this school, is about that living in that in-between space. So you've learned how to bridge when you're one of only two or one of only three. And that is such a powerful skill to have. So tell us a little bit about your journey now. Take us to, you're going to law school, and what things impacted you? How did working as an attorney, kind of where you started as an attorney to where you are now, how did that unfold for you?
The path was an interesting path. I think, when I first graduated from, going back to sort of being a teacher and then deciding to go to law school, I always, I guess, had in my mind that I needed to do something to help people. And I think that's kind of was how this all started. I mean, I think teaching started that way because I had people who were influential in my life, like my coaches and teachers and like that. And I think I wanted to give that to students, which is why I think I chose that path initially. And I think it's even continued now, sort of giving back in the path I am now, which is, spending, I spent a full year right after I graduated as a judicial law clerk for he's now retired Supreme Court Justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court, Justice Wallace. I spent time with him the year before he was actually elevated to Supreme Court as his appellate clerk. And then from there, I went into the practice of law. I started off at a firm doing pharmaceutical defense work. We represented, big pharmaceutical companies who were being sued. And throughout that time, I was getting involved with the Bar Association in New Jersey, here locally. And one of the suggestions that was made to me by one of a mentor was that, I should join the diversity committee of the New Jersey State Bar. And that's kind of how I really got involved and it'll lead to where I am today as chief diversity officer. But that's really where I got involved in learning about how diversity fits into like the legal space and law practice. And that's kind of really where, the beginning of my diversity, equity, and inclusion career, I guess, or learning more about it and understanding more about it started back in 2002.
New Jersey Bar Association had a diversity committee, and you were like, "Hey, I want to get involved with that." And what was your hope, or what was the ideas around having a diversity committee at the New Jersey Bar Association? Because I think that's really important.
Well, I mean, I would say, at that time in 2002, it was unusual for a state bar association to have an actual diversity committee. So New Jersey has always kind of been on the forefront of, of this work and trying to get the legal profession more, more diversified. So a lot of the work we did at that time in 2002 was really focusing on how could we get the message out to law firms that there is a diversity problem, because we have qualified students and attorneys that are from various different backgrounds, ethnicities, et cetera. But there, for some reason, doesn't seem to be, this nucleus of, I guess, attorneys in law firms. And so, some of that could be because, individuals don't want to work in private law firms. There could be a variety of reasons, but the one reason that I think the State Bar Association with the Diversity Committee did well was educate the managing partners of the law firms in New Jersey on things like, there's the Asian Pacific Attorneys Association. That's not the right name, but it's Paula. There's a Hispanic Bar Association. There's the Garden State Bar Association here in New Jersey, which is the affiliate to the National Bar Association, which is the African American Bar. So just by doing things like, going to those events, networking, meeting people, we did a diversity summit at the State Bar. And what we wanted to do was get together all of we call them affinity bars. So, whatever ethnic group might have a bar association, they would come and we would have a meeting with the managing partners in the bigger firms in New Jersey. And they would just have a dialogue, on how can we work together? How can we get candidates to you? Because we know we have some candidates who can work in some of these big law firms. And so that was really what that work entailed at that point. It was less about some of the equity and inclusion type issues that you hear about now. And then it was really just more about the diversity piece. Like, how can we get the law firms, specifically here in New Jersey, more diversity?
Yeah, and as you're talking about like the Asian American Pacific Islander law group, or the Hispanic, or African American, those associations, and often people misunderstand. It's like it's the purpose is not to keep others out. The purpose is to create community for individuals when they may be the only person of that group in a space. And so creating community of support for individuals. So I think you bring up a really great point, that these associations existed to help create that community. But then it sounds like and I do think it's very strategic and great foresight back then for the New Jersey Bar Association to be able to say, hey, here's some great talent that you may be missing out on. And that is really awesome. And you have written a ton, which I loved reading a lot of the stuff that you've written. One of the things that you wrote that I think came out in 2017 was the article that was making the case how diversity and inclusion can improve a firm's financial outlook. So since then, what have you identified as to how diversity and inclusion can really have a positive impact on a firm's financial outlook?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's several ways. I think, since 2017 to where we are in 2025, I think the fact remains that if you can build an inclusive workplace, then your attorneys, and I'll use, this profession, your attorneys will stay at the firm because they will see that they have opportunities for growth. They'll see that they're getting, good cases to work on, and that they really feel like they're part of the team. And so, besides the billable hours that those attorneys will work, because that's how firms work, you bill your hours. Clients pay you for the time that's billed. And so, the more attorneys you have that are billing time and effectively billing time, meaning they feel like they're in an environment where they're challenged and they want to do the work, right? So that's one way that you can improve a firm's financial outlook, right? Is by the more billable hours that are generated because people want to work at the firm because they feel included. That's a bonus. And then secondarily, I mean, there's another way. If you lose attorneys, right? If you lose an attorney because they don't feel like they are included in the workplace or that they belong, and have opportunities for growth, professional development, opportunities, and things of that nature, then you could lose that attorney. And then if you lose that attorney, I think we talked about this a little bit, that you lose the time that they first check out of the job, some of the time where they're not billing what they need to be doing at the firm, and then you lose them when they decide finally, to no longer work at the firm. So, then you have to now hire someone. You have to spend the money to do that. The recruiting budget starts getting hit there. And the time from human resources people to then now interview these folks. So that's kind of can be a net loss there, because it does cost money to, onboard a new employee. And the more frequently you have to do that, then the higher, financial loss that will occur from all the time that's spent onboarding people.
Yeah, yeah. Those are some significant costs for a firm, for any organization. A couple of things you mentioned. First of all, you talked about inclusion. Um, and I think people don't really understand what exactly is inclusion. So I'd love to have you help clear up some of the misconceptions that people have about that. You've already done that. And then the other piece that you talked about was human resource. And I guess the other that I think is important for people to understand that your role as the chief diversity officer is very separate from the hiring and the human resource folks. So if you wouldn't mind maybe diving into those a little deeper to help clear up some of those misconceptions.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll take the human resources part first. I think um, a lot of companies initially, and some still do, but I thought they put the diversity, equity, and inclusion person under the guidance of human resources. And I think there's something that I think it's a mistake to do that, because I think what we are trying to achieve in the diversity, equity, and inclusion department is a lot different than what they're trying to achieve in the human resources department. Human resources can extend from things like hiring, interviewing, hiring, to fielding complaints from employees, dealing with the firing, hiring of employees, and such. My department doesn't do anything when it comes directly relating to hiring individuals. We may look at the process after the fact. If it looks like we are hiring, just say we're hiring more women than anybody else, we might look and just make sure that there's no sort of bias in our systems right there that makes that the case. And vice versa, if there are any bias in the system where we're losing candidates of certain ethnicities or backgrounds or what have you, because we do know that most individuals do have an implicit bias. And one of the things we try to do, we do a training on this. We did one last year, but on implicit bias and what does that mean? And when you're in the interviewing process, are there things that you can do to defeat that bias, to break that bias? And I think we do a good job here at this firm of having things like we have structured interview questions. So people are asked the same questions. So, so we do some things here so that we can break down barriers and any bias that we have in our systems. And then that leads me to the inclusion part, because I think we internally, we have trainings for our leaders on inclusive leadership. What does it mean to be an inclusive leader? How do you interact? How do you run a meeting and make sure that everyone's voice is heard in that meeting, and people aren't overspoken, right? We know sometimes studies will show that women are sometimes overtalked, or their ideas, they might have a great idea, and then a male in the room gives the same idea, and then all the credit goes great job to that male individual, when the idea had already come from one of the female workers. So we try to make sure that our leaders understand how to be an inclusive leader, because again, it goes back to we want all of our employees to feel very comfortable and understand that they can bring their authentic self to work and really thrive here. And that's if you can get your employees feeling that way, you'll know you've created an inclusive environment.
Yeah, yeah. Though that is so good. And I love that you identified, my career started in human resources. And it was in the 90s when our organization was looking at we need a diversity effort, kind of a thing. And it was it's a health system. And I really wanted to be in that space. And I remember hearing someone say, your HR people should have nothing to do with your diversity initiative. And I was like taken aback by it. I was like, what do you mean? This is, about people. How can it not be kind of and then, you know, fast forward, almost 27 years later, you know, and for the last decade, I've said, yeah, your diversity practices, all of those things you're doing is about strategic effectiveness, right? And so those things should be separate from HR. So yes, it took me an evolution. It took me time to get to what you're saying because my background was human resources. But I 100% agree with you. And I think that is absolutely one of the best things an organization can do is to make your chief diversity officer at that executive level looking at those strategic decisions that the team is making.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I report directly to a managing partner, and I think that's important, like all the C-suite executives. And you know, it being separate from HR, I just think it clears up issues. It clears up what's supposed to happen on both sides of the spectrum. Like HR knows exactly what their tasks are. The diversity, equity, and inclusion part knows exactly what we're trying to do. But we can all end up working together to strategize on, how can we all do everything better.
Yeah. So, given your vast experience doing this work, what do you think is one of the biggest challenges that firms face when they're trying to truly create an inclusive workplace?
I think the biggest thing for really a law firm is just everyone is so very busy, in a law firm, and I think sometimes what happens is people are so busy, particularly our attorneys who have to bill their hours and keep up with their time. They're going to court and things like that. I think sometimes people don't slow down enough to take a deep breath and really think about where they are in their space on that day, right? And I think that that leads to is if people just took a deep breath and thought about the things that they do on a daily basis, a minute by minute basis, then I think you wouldn't have some of the issues that you do have where you have a workplace that's not inclusive because you know because we're moving so fast. Sometimes we don't think, maybe I'm talking to this person a certain way, or maybe this person who's come to me to have a conversation is trying to express something to me, but I'm so busy, I'm not really thinking, what are they actually saying to me? I'm just thinking, okay, I've got all these issues and things I have to deal with. What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? Here's a solution to a problem, when it could just be, say a junior attorney wanting to talk to a senior attorney to just absorb some knowledge. And so if you aren't able to kind of stop, pause, and take that deep breath, to enjoy sort of every moment you have in the office and every interaction you have with other people in the office, then I think you can sometimes now fail to have that inclusive workplace.
Oh, that's absolutely. And one of the things I've noticed over the years is often add to the mix of you're really busy and you're moving fast, you've got things to get done. Add to that individuals who've never been taught about emotional intelligence, self-awareness, managing yourself. How do you show up in those spaces and those things? So there's that lack of preparedness, I will call it. Add to that a busy schedule, lots of demands, and that environment when you've got people who have different perspectives, different lived experiences coming into a situation, if there's even a level of tension, it could create discomfort for people. It could create misunderstandings, poor outcomes, whatever it is in that situation. So you're bringing up a really great point here.
Yeah, and then when you think about, some of what this role is in diversity, equity, inclusion is the risk management aspect of things, right? You don't want lawsuits, right? So you want people treated fairly. You want people really treated nicely, right? So they don't feel upset and don't think that they're not welcome somewhere. And then, to your point, we talked about earlier, they kind of check out, and then next thing you know, you might have a lawsuit. So you really want to, really be thinking about the risk management of how people, to your point, have this can lead with emotional intelligence.
Oh, yeah. I have a client right now that I'm doing some coaching with, and one of the things she said was, we really just simply want people to be good humans. Be a good human. That's the bottom line of it. And it's so hard when we have demands on us and our brain is saying you got to protect yourself. It's really tough. It sounds dumb to even say that it's hard for people to be a good human, but it really is. tough. So given your personal experiences that you've had, whether it was growing up, working as a school teacher, or your upbringing, your background, how do you think those things have shaped the way you work to advance this work at your firm?
Yeah, I mean, as a practicing attorney, and doing that for 20 plus years, I've seen kind of a shift in really how the practice of law, how you work in the practice of law. I mean, from just, starting with the whole hybrid workplace now in 2020 to where we were in 2002. I remember, leaving and going on my honeymoon and coming back, because they didn't have, the iPhones and all that, coming back to like 300 emails, and just really being able to, come back, focus on those emails. Nobody was that upset. They knew you were out of pocket. You couldn't get your emails. So the practice of law has changed from where we were, especially with technology from 2002, when I first started, to 2025, where we are, now. And, I think part of that change with how now, um, you're on the clock 24 hours a day. I think again that now changes, how we work and why people work. People now, I think, with the hybrid workplace, don't mind if they can work from home 1 or 2 days a week, having all the stresses and things at home that you have, because now they're less stressful because you're able to, handle it, being in your environment, right? You wake up, go downstairs to get ready to work on your computer, but you can, throw a load of laundry in or something like that. So all those stresses you used to have outside of the workplace, now with a hybrid working, how we are now, I think it helps people be a little bit more in tune with who they are when they're working.
Yeah. I have a friend who I love what he has at the bottom of his email. And he says, my work hours may be different than your work hours. If this email reaches you at a time that is outside of your work hours, please feel no pressure to respond. And I love that. And, not just the hybrid work, but also the fact that we work with people from all over. I mean, you're on Eastern time, I'm on Central time. Our audio engineer that's recording us is in South Africa. And so we live in an environment where people are all over and we're communicating at all different times. So that pressure of immediate response sometimes is tough for us to learn to manage, because before you didn't have that technology available to you. Like you said, you were out of pocket. You're on your honeymoon. People understood. But now, and so part of that is, how do we create this shared language between us in our firm, that this is how we want to interact with each other and with those outside? So for those who are endeavoring to be leaders that create inclusion and belonging, what advice would you have for them as to how to do that?
I mean, I think the biggest piece of advice is to, learn about who you are and what your leadership style is, right? So once you identify what your leadership style is, then you can determine whether or not, you are an inclusive leader, right? Maybe you already are, but even if you already are, I think, the best thing for a leader in this space to do, is read, read the articles that are out there. There's a lot of books now that people are writing on leadership and how to be an inclusive leader. So there's ways that, you can get this information, on your own, right? And ways and learn how to do it. I mean, I think if you work at a place where there is a chief diversity officer or someone in this type of role, even go to speak to that person, you're right, and talk to them. And I think that's what we're here for. We have a background in, most of these subject matters, and I think, just really going to ask the resource in your office, how can I do this better? How can I lead better? But I think, again, that takes some looking in the mirror, right? And you have to look at yourself and say, what kind of leader am I? And determine whether or not there's some shortcomings, there are shortfalls in the way that you're leading. And I think most of us, if we do that, we realize there are, and there's things that we can do better as leaders. And I think the one thing that a lot of people would probably figure out if they did sort of this self-assessment is that they probably aren't as inclusive as a leader as they think they may be.
Mhm. Yeah. And that takes a lot of courage to truly be honest with ourselves. And then, the words of Michael Jackson, start with the man in the mirror. When you said that, that absolutely, yeah, rings very true even now, those decades later. Um, so, tell us a little bit of a fun fact about you. Some things that people will be surprised.
Uh, well, like I said, I grew up outside of Washington D.C. And um, I think the one thing that like what might surprise people is that I grew up, even though growing up in the neighborhood that I grew up, I ended up being, I guess, classified as what they call punk rocker in that day. So I listened to a lot of punk rock bands, and really, I looked into a lot of, eclectic. My musical tastes are eclectic. But I think if you went back in time and saw me in high school, and that'd be the one thing that probably be surprising is is being a punk rocker and hanging out with some of my friends who they actually did things with their hair. I didn't really do anything crazy, but I think that would probably be the really one surprising thing about me.
So are you still a punk rocker, kind of a hidden punk rocker?
I still every now and then I'll put the music on in the car, but the kids just think it's noise. So I don't know. I don't get a chance to. Unless I'm by myself, I might listen to some of the old groups that I used to listen to.
That's awesome. I love it. I love it. Yeah, we maybe the stereotype is not to think of an attorney as being a punk rocker. So I love that. I love that you are blowing our mind in that way. So that's great. So where can our audience learn more about the firm you're working with, the work you're doing, a little bit about, kind of the things that you're advancing, anything you're writing? Where can our audience learn about that?
Certainly LinkedIn, under Kenneth Sharperson. And there you can find, the Armstrong Teasdale name, link to our website. And if you want to see more about what we're doing, at the firm, we have ERGs. We have a scholarship that we fund for I think it's 3 law students at this point, different law schools. And so you can see, some of the things I've been writing and have written will be under my bio on the atllp.com website. And that's, but like LinkedIn is, a lot of time I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So if people wanted to connect and things like that, it's under Kenneth Sharperson.
That's fantastic. One of the things I was checking you out on LinkedIn. One of the things I saw was the great work your daughter's doing. And I thought, oh, there's a proud dad. I love that. When we can cheer on our kids.
Yeah. No, I have two daughters that are in college right now. One's at Florida A&M in Tallahassee, and she's doing well. She's a computer information systems major, which apparently that's such a good space to be in today. And she's had some roles with Eli Lilly, Google. She did a seminar thing with Google where they flew her up to Atlanta and things like that. So no, she's been doing really well. And my other daughter is a freshman at Spelman. She's doing phenomenal. She's really adapted to that lifestyle of Atlanta. I don't think she wants to leave. But yeah, they're both doing really well, my 2 daughters. So
That's awesome. Well, as a person who's taught in higher ed, that those college years can be so important and such great formative years. I'm glad they're having a great experience. And my sense is you and your wife have been great role models for them as to how to continue to contribute and make the world a better place. Thank you, Kenneth, for what you're doing. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it. And thanks for your courage to continue to do the work that you're doing.
No, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak, with you about the work I'm doing in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And, we're in a special time now where I think, we have to keep getting the message out that what we're doing in the DEI space is a good thing, not a bad thing. And I think, that's the message that needs to kind of override some of the anti-DEI bias that's out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I appreciate that you are doing that. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
You too.
This has been Because People Matter, a podcast about celebrating leaders who are harnessing the best of each team member while driving success in their organizations and communities. You can find links to any resources mentioned in today's show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review. Thank you for listening. Because People Matter is brought to you by Helen Fagan and Associates. We are changing the world one leader at a time. Go to helenfagan.com to learn more about what we can do for your organization. That's helenfagan.com. HELENFAGAN.com.